What's up, guys, and welcome to a brand new installment of Fact You. Here's your good buddy, Uncle Ben. On today's episode, I'm going to be talking about the great alternate picking versus economy picking debate and my preferences in guitars and stuff like that. But before we do, let's stop in at Uncle Ben's boombox and see what I've been jamming out to lately. I would say the record that has caught my ear the most lately has been Albatross by Big Wreck, which came out in 2012. If you've never listened to Big Wreck, you really owe it to yourself. They're a band from Canada that I seriously just don't know why they are not one of the biggest bands in the world. You know, they're really absolutely amazing songwriters. The records sound phenomenal, and their singer guitar player Ian Thornley is seriously just like too talented for one person. It's insane. The guy can sing like Chris Cornell. He can shred the guitar. He is an incredible guitar player and just has such an amazing knack for writing really amazing, hooky, memorable, and unique songs. I'd say the record kind of has elements of like the 90s grunge sound, which is kind of when they started, you know, as well as a huge, diverse bunch of influences from bands like Led Zeppelin, some of the technicality of bands like Rush. There's like a lot of odd time signature stuff on this album, and some ripping guitar solos. Oh man, I can't say enough about it. I was on a really long plane ride recently. I flew out to Utah to film an entire huge lesson program about heavy metal guitar with Musician's Toolkit, which I'm really excited about. More details on that coming up really soon. So I had a couple of long plane rides from Utah back to Tennessee, and this record was kind of my constant companion the entire way. I just listened to it several times through. I would say that Big Wreck first came on my radar a couple of years ago whenever I was playing my first Sir Artist Party with Andy Wood. They do like this huge artist party thing at the Sir Factory most years during the NAMM show. And we were playing as well as Big Wreck. Big Wreck was kind of the headliner for the show. And I had like heard of them before, and I'd maybe heard a song or two and thought that it was cool. And I was like, well, it'll be cool to get to see this band live. And I stood out there in the audience and just could not believe what I was hearing. I watched their entire set, I think all 2 or 3 nights that we were playing, just because it was some of the greatest live playing I think that I've ever heard. Their sound, their tones, everybody's backup vocals, everybody's playing, everybody in that band can just play their asses off. It was really, really, really phenomenal, so I've been a really hardcore fan ever since then. So yeah, next time you're in the mood to listen to some really intelligent rock with really excellent songwriting and hooks and musicality and technicality at times, I can't recommend Albatross by Big Wreck enough. Scope it out now. Okay, so our first question today is a cool one. It comes from my man Dustin J. He asks, have you ever had a particular feature on a guitar that you at one time used to be a total stickler about, especially when you were in maybe your first year or two of playing, that you could now care less about? That's a really good question. I would say that my tastes have changed a lot, but I know for one thing that I could point out that I used to just be an absolute stickler about that I don't really care very much about anymore is I used to demand like a razor thin neck on my guitars. Whenever I started playing guitar, I played Ibanez guitars first, which of course have a nice, you know, thin, slim neck on them. My brother had like an old Ibanez EX and some other stuff, so maybe it's because that's what I started on. That's always what I wanted in a guitar. I'd pick up a guitar like a Les Paul or something like that, and I wouldn't even care how great it sounded. I was like, ooh, the neck is fat, I don't like it. So back in the day, I always used to have guitars with like the thinnest necks possible on them. But honestly, I think like where that kind of started to change is I played 7-string guitars exclusively for probably like 7 or 8 years. I think that there's a time period where it's like I owned like one 6-string and it was taken apart for years, you know, because I was playing 7s all the time. And what I found is that after I played 7s so hardcore for a while and then I went back to playing 6s, the thickness of the neck didn't matter anymore. It's like after you're used to playing a 7-string with that big extra wide neck and stuff, pretty much every neck feels skinny and manageable, you know? It's like as long as I can wrap my thumb around it and like fret notes on the low E, the neck isn't really too fat anymore. Like playing Les Pauls and stuff like that, I don't care. They sound awesome and they feel really good. And ultimately, like I said, compared to a 7-string neck, pretty much everything is pretty manageable. Now I will say though, when it comes to those thin necks, I still do kind of require that on a 7-string. Like a 7 with a big fat neck to me is just so cumbersome and terrible to play. I don't like doing that. So I still do like having a really thin neck on those 7s, and if I did play 8s, then I would demand it on there too. But yeah, I would say that's probably the biggest thing for me that's changed, is that I just don't really care about neck thickness anymore. As long as it sounds really good and plays good, that's really all I care about. Okay, this next question here is a good one from Jay the guitar player. He asks, why do people argue for alternate picking when all evidence in the world points to directional picking as a far superior and easier technique? Now, when you say directional picking, I'm going to assume that you mean economy picking. We'll talk about the differences here as we go. That's a really interesting question, because obviously there's a lot of guys in the guitar world that have done incredible things with alternate picking, like Steve Morris and Al Di Meola and Paul Gilbert and guys like that. And then there's the economy picking dudes who burn with it too. Yngwie's an economy guy. Eric Johnson's an economy guy. Of course, Frank Gambale, you got to mention him. As well as like Tosin Abasi from Animals as Leaders. He's a big economy picking guy too. And there's certain things that it does really, really, really well, you know? But I'm not really going to say that one technique is necessarily better than another. Let's kind of talk about some of the differences here and some of the advantages that economy picking has over alternate picking, but then why it might not necessarily be better. Okay, so let's say that I was playing through like a 3-note per string scale, right? Like maybe this A major scale, 3 notes on every string. So as I'm playing through that and playing 3 notes on every string, let's imagine that these are the strings, right? Like E, A, D. If I'm alternate picking that, that means that I'm going down, up, down, and then the next string is going up, down, up, and then the next string is going down, up, down, and so on. Pure alternate picking. Whenever you do that, there is some wasted energy there. There's some wasted motion. And I know a lot of players are really obsessed about economy of motion and not making any extra movements if they can help it. So like if I'm alternate picking that and I go down, up, down on that string, and then I'm trying to go upstroke starting here, right? Down, up, down, up, down, up. Well, if you'll watch, the pick passed by the string. Down, up, down, passed it by, so I could go up, down, up. That in itself is kind of inefficient. And economy picking is there to solve those problems, right? Because if you're economy picking that, you go down, up, down, and then you're like, well, I'm right above this string anyway. Down, up, down. Instead of passing it by, hit it on the way, right? So again, with the economy picking thing, it is inarguably more efficient. That's all there is to it. It is. You're not passing by the string and backtracking. You're just hitting it on the way. And again, that is completely inarguable. So for most of my time as a player, I have been an alternate picking guy or a mix of like alternate and legato, depending on the lick. There are a few economy pick things that I do now that I've picked up through cracking the code, which is cool. But for the majority of the time, I have enjoyed good old, inefficient, old-fashioned alternate picking, mainly because for me, the time feel is just so much better. One of those things that I always tell my students is like, in physics, they say a body in motion tends to stay in motion. I find in guitar, a body in rhythm tends to stay in rhythm. You know what I mean? If your hand is making nonstop down, up, down, up, down, up movements like this right here, I guarantee you that the time feel is going to be better than a hand that's going down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, 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 up, down, up. It's even harder to like say that and keep on rhythm than just saying down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. Again, when you're constantly in motion like this, especially at really high tempos, I just find that the timing of it is better. The downstrokes are landing on the downbeats, always. The upstrokes are landing on the upbeats, or the E's and U's, the 16th notes, depending on the phrase. And I just find that keeps me locked into the groove so much better. And I think that it's not just me either. I think that you can see this in other players and the way that their picking choice affects their playing too. So think about a guy like Eric Johnson, right? He does a lot of like downward pick slanting economy picking, which is to say exclusively down to down economy picking. But a lot of his really fast licks, they're not necessarily, let's say, grooving, right? It'll be like 9 notes spread out across a beat. Or it'll just be kind of like this big, beautiful like slur or like this flurry of notes that isn't necessarily, ticka, 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 like grooving like that is, right? Again, that's a certain effect that's cool. Yngwie is the same way. A lot of Yngwie's really fast stuff isn't necessarily 16th notes to the tempo. It's just kind of like this flash of notes. It's like a storm of notes with that economy picking time feel. Tosin Abasi is the same way. He's got some stuff that's alternate, of course, but a lot of his lines that are like arpeggios and stuff like that, where he's using the economy picking, tend to be what I call blurry. Again, it's not a hyper-rhythmic thing, But whenever you compare it to like an alternate picking guy, like Paul Gilbert, right? One of the reasons I've always liked Paul, who is just a pretty strict alternate picker, or a mix of picking and legato, is whenever he does fast runs and stuff, it's grooving. If the tempo is this, his runs are, they're just right on the groove. They're very, very, very metric. And I think that's because this feel of going down, up, 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 just keeps you in that groove much tighter. It keeps you locked into the rhythm better, in my opinion. Bluegrass cats will tell you the same thing. That's one of those things that, like, I find guitar players just in general don't really look at enough, is like bluegrass players, like Brian Sutton or Tony Rice or some of those guys that really burn. A lot of those guys are exclusively alternate picking. No matter which way they're going through the strings, whether it's, you know, descending or ascending, whatever, a lot of those guys play alternate because a lot of those bluegrass tunes are like 200 BPM. I mean, scorching fast, extremely fast. And at those speeds, pretty much all that you can do to hang on rhythmically is this. Just keep in rhythm. Is it harder? Yeah, absolutely. Is it less efficient? Absolutely. But whenever the hand is grooving like this, you're just locked into that tempo that much better than somebody who's going down, up, down, down, up, down, down, up, down, down, up, down. Now, of course, there's exceptions to these rules. You know, there are guys out there that can groove like crazy with economy picking, and I'm sure that they've devoted a lot of time to making sure they're very metric with it. And that's something that I recommend people do, is if they're really getting serious about practicing the economy picking thing, practice it, you know, really metrically, really set a metronome or something up and make sure that you can play 16th notes or 16th triplets or whatever with your economy picking technique. You don't want to be limited to just the blurry thing, you know, like the EJ thing or the Yngwie thing. In my book anyway, I don't want to be limited to just one or the other, which is why I like having some of that economy picky stuff on tap. Sometimes I want to have that blur of notes going by, and then sometimes I want to alternate pick through something and have that really rigid diddle 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 diddle, you know, Paul Gilbert kind of thing. I really like that sound too, so I'm like, why can't we have both, right? So I would say in general, yeah, economy picking is a lot more efficient. If you're just looking at a totally technical kind of level, obviously it's more efficient. But from my experience and the experience of listening to a lot of other players that economy pick, the time feel just isn't really there. So if you're looking to get some really groovy, super fast phrasings, I recommend working on your alternate picking. And if you really want to go for that blurry, you know, again, it's like 9 notes across 2 beats kind of sound, which is sick. I love that sound. Then yeah, dig into some of that economy picking stuff. Okay, the next question here comes from my man Carlos, who asks, have you read The Shining by Stephen King? That book is scary as shit. If you like the movie, you'll probably love the book. So pretty much anybody that knows me knows that I am absolutely obsessed with The Shining, the movie. I've seen it a million times. It's my favorite scary movie of all time. Just one of my favorite movies, period, of any kind. So a couple of years ago, I was like, you know what? I've really got to read the book. My wife had read it before, and it absolutely scared her to death. So I was really excited to read the book. And I was really intrigued by how different it is from the movie. It's a lot different. And, you know, of course, that's typical books to movies. There's always going to be changes made and stuff. But I'll tell you what, man. It's like, I know that there's a lot of those things where I will either love the movie or love the book, you know, one or the other. But man, with The Shining, I love them both for completely different reasons. Apparently Stephen King was like super pissed about the way that the movie came out because it's so different than the book. But man, I really love them both equally for different reasons. I love how in the book you get all that extra history about the Overlook, and all that extra history about like the Dog Man and all that weird stuff. It is so creepy. All that time that Jack spends down like in the boiler room going through all those like, you know, blueprints and documents and journals and stuff like this about the history of the Overlook. All that stuff really creeped me out. So yeah, I do love the book. I read it years ago, and I would definitely recommend checking it out if you're a fan of the movie. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and watching this video. Be sure to like and subscribe and follow me on Instagram at Ben Eller Guitars. And also be sure to leave me some comments with whatever questions you want to see answered on the next installment of FAQ You. Not just music stuff. Send me stuff about movies, send me stuff about video games and food and TV shows and whatever it is that you guys want to chat about. So be sure to leave me some comments letting me know what questions you have burning in your loins. Until then, I'll be seeing you guys soon on the next installment of FAQ You. Cheers.